It's always hard to approach a game like Civilization. If you've been watching my videos at all for games, you've noticed that I tend to have a lean towards literary styles, characterization, story, plot, themes, etc. That kind of thing. That tends to be the primary thing I tend to think about because, well, that's one of the reasons I started calling these ruminations instead of reviews, is because that is me thinking about, the game and discussing it. And usually, to be honest, I'm not thinking about a game's gameplay. That being said, it is worth noting that I am a very big fond of good gameplay in a game. In fact, when I get to the Kingdom Hearts series, which, by the way, is currently in a three-way tie with the vote that's going on right now for first, so that may be soon. You'll notice that one of the things I'm going to mention is that one of the big things I enjoy about this series so much is the gameplay. You know, it is something that is worth noting. A good interactive story can be a wonderful thing. A good interactive story that you enjoy and developing can be an amazing thing. It's the difference between Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy VI, to put it in such terms. Now, before anybody gets too mad at me, I'm not saying Final Fantasy Tactics has bad gameplay. I am saying I don't enjoy it. I don't enjoy that kind of turn-based combat, almost board game style combat. There is a term for it, and the gentleman who developed it used it in several other games, including Tactics Ogre, for example. But I just don't enjoy that type of fun gameplay. I never have. It's not my thing. I put up with it because the story was so absolutely freaking incredible. But FF6, I actually enjoyed playing while having a story that's absolutely incredible. So you get my point here. All of this is a preamble to the fact that Civilization V is a game that is hard to talk about anything but the gameplay. Now I'll get into that a little bit more in a bit. I wanted to start on that note, but there's one other thing I really want to get out of the way right off the bat. A lot of you have probably heard some bad things about Civilization V, and to be frank, a lot of it was deserved. Note that I say was, not is. Civilization V, when it came out, had some of the poorest support and patch development cycles I'd seen in a long time. It was actually pathetic to the point where I almost gave up on the game completely, which is quite a shame because I didn't really particularly enjoy Civ 3 that much, for example. Civ 4 was fine, but Civ 3 had similar problems with just kind of being, and it never went anywhere, and then it died. I was really worried that Civ 5 was going to be another casualty. I am glad that they finally got around to fixing it, but to give you an idea, one of the problems they had early on, I'm not going to describe the full details of the bug. Suffice it to say, there was a sufficient bug in the game that made it so that, well, okay, for those of you who don't know, civilizations in general are turn-based strategy empire builders. Okay, basically invented the 4X genre way back in Civilization 1. Yes, I know there were other games that were first, but Civilization really kind of started it, just like Doom really started the FPS, even though it wasn't the first. So at the end of every turn, the computer processes everything that is everything that's automated, everything that's happening at the end of your turn. And then it goes through all the other computer players' turn, and then it gets back to you, right? There was a bug that made that process take minutes. That may not sound like a lot, but let's say in your turn you order these three troops to move here, order this city to build an aqueduct, you have these guys fortify here, and have these three workers start building a road. Done. All of that took about them as much time as it actually took me to say it just now. And now you're sitting here. Now, I'm not actually going to make you do this to get the point across, but if you will, glance down at the time and just kind of take a note. We're at 3:47 on my thing here right now. So in a few minutes here, I'm going to make a point of how long it has been since that turn started to process, and you'll get a point of why this is a huge issue. Now, some people just kind of gave up on the game. Some people returned it. Some people who knew enough about programming actually got in there and fixed several of the bugs themselves, because I wanted to play right then and there, and I wanted to play multiplayer. And by the way, the problem was infinitely worse in multiplayer. Multiplayer games actually got to the point of being unplayable, to the point where you'd do your turn, and the other guy would do his turn, and then you would both go back to whatever else you were doing, watching TV or doing whatever, because it would be several minutes before you got back to your turn, because it was just that bad. And there were a lot of other problems that Civ 5 was having, especially on the PR side of things. They really were not doing very well. I am glad they started picking it up and actually started fixing these problems. As of right now, Civ 5 is working a lot better. Civ 5 is also one of the first games that got into the Steam Workshop thing, which, by the way, is something I am massively in favor of. While the Steam Workshop has its share of bad things, as all such things do, You can generally browse through there and find a fairly large amount of decent quality mods, plugin scenarios, etc. And they're extremely easy to install and extremely easy to uninstall. It all works very nicely and very smoothly. And one of the things I've been gratified by is the increase of the mod community in Civ 5. Now, I want to pause for a moment before I really start going into that. I want to take a step back because I want to get this out of the way too. I mentioned how I can't talk about a story in Civ 5. I probably should have struck at this better, but whatever. That's actually not quite true. This, if anybody out there does not think I am a geek prior to now, I'm afraid I may just about to be leaping over the precipice, and you may have lost all respect and common decency for me uh, with these words that I'm about to say. By the way, I'd just like to point out that it has now been 2 minutes since I first mentioned it, so I want you to picture that this whole time I've been talking, you've been staring at your screen doing nothing. And that's 2 minutes. That's early on. It can get much worse with larger maps and with more enemies. So now, one of the things I like to do, and I know I'm not alone in this, I know other people have done this before, is kind of write a story as you go. You know what I mean? Obviously, it's going to be a very broad stroke story. There's not going to be very many characters so much as there's going to be nations involved. But it's very interesting to me to watch the tale unfold as my kingdom, which originally is very kind and malevolent, and then gets uh, invaded, basically. Not literally, we aren't declared war upon, but someone starts invade goes into the land that we had claimed and settles cities literally right next door to our existing cities and starts taking our resources from us. And so it's like, okay, so we end up going to war in order to defend them, and that triggers a war with someone else. And I could keep going, but the point is, one of the things I love to do is to write the story as I go, and actually add a degree of setting, a degree of background, a degree of, the politics involved, even though they aren't actually there, because as anyone knows, the diplomacy AI is kind of lackluster in Civ 5. This has been true for all the Civs, actually, let's just be honest with ourselves. All the way back to Civ 1, the diplomacy AI has always had issues with actually being diplomatic and actually working in any reasonable fashion. The closest you'll get to something that's interesting as far as the AI goes is occasionally they will go out of their way to, buddy buddy with you, and they're, hey, we're friends, and we will go, and now we will declare war now that you have turned your back on us. That kind of thing. Or not, you get the point. That's about as clever as they tend to get, so it's not really that engaging on that end, but it is engaging for me to see to think about what's going on behind the scenes, so to speak, to think about the cultural differences, to think about all the changes that are going on in the world as it is developing and growing. So I admit that I do like that, and I know that that's something that some people do enjoy doing as well. I've known several people personally like that, who enjoy writing stories to their Civilization games, and I see nothing wrong with that personally, obviously, since I do it myself. But I think the reason I like it so much is because it's one of those things that is purely optional. I've talked about this before. It's something that the game itself doesn't even really encourage, per se. It's something that develops within your own mind if you want it to. You follow me? And so I do like that element of the game, and I do, if the seed has been planted for anyone out there who's playing Civ and never actually thought to do that, go for it. And if you don't like it, then that's fine. But that is basically the extent of anything I could talk about with regards to story. Civilization 5 is a hard game to look at because it's a 4X game. What do you say about a 4X game? I do enjoy many of the changes they made. They did make combat a little bit more sense make. For example, especially if you have the Gods and Kings expansion, any general unit has hundreds of HP, and any general attack will do a basic number depending on dozens upon dozens of different variables, rather than it being, say, in Civilization 2, what would happen is two units would attack and then would continue to attack forever until one of them died. You understand? As opposed to in Civ 5, where if I've got a tank and you've got a tank and we both attack, let's say we both take 11 damage out of our 100 HP, and that's the end of the combat right there. They've both used up their turn. It's an interesting approach, and while it does make war more difficult if you are the invader, it makes it infinitely easier if you are the defender, and personally I like that, not just because of any, war, what's it good for? No, but because it's a lot more realistic, and it also makes it more interesting to play races that are not trying to be warmongers, that are not trying to be conquerors. It is especially on the higher difficulty levels in Civ 5, you will find that it is extremely common that other civs will declare war on you fairly regularly and try to take your stuff, and you can make them pay for every inch, if you know what I mean. You think World War One was bad? Whew. I have held out people for so long in just this one area with this one trebuchet that happened to be there because I know how to use my units, and fighting on the defensive works very well as long as you know what you're doing. There's also a degree of disparity with the tech progress compared to other things. It was so easy in previous civs to get so far ahead that you're literally attacking people who have archers and spears with tanks. This, because of the way the tech tree has been stretched out and because of the way that research in general costs more, that generally doesn't happen in this game. That can happen if you're on the easier difficulty settings and you really push for research, but in general, the most tech advantage you're likely to have is basically a few years, which again, I like because it makes sense. You, the player, being just ahead of the enemy in terms of technological progress and just having enough time to punch out of your manufacturers, some of these brand new forces before the enemy starts getting the ability to make them at all, makes sense to me. Now, it is also worth noting that under certain circumstances, which I'll talk about more when we get to the mods, there will be a great deal of difficulty involved in keeping up, basically, especially technologically speaking, because the enemy tends to get really, really ambitious with research, especially with certain mods attached. Again, I'll mention that later. And so sometimes you have the opposite situation where the enemy is one step ahead of you technologically, and thus you cannot rely on a technological advantage. You have to instead rely on either numbers or production or just simple tactics. Now, of course, all this is talking about warfare. One of the things I like about Civ 5 is that there are quite a few ways to win other than the standard war and science victory, which has been the default since forever. You can win a cultural victory. In this game, there's a new feature called Culture. It's similar to what was happening in Civ 4, but it's executed differently. You use Culture to buy what are effectively talents. If you've played WoW or LOTR or Tor, you know what talents are. And these talents improve your civilization to a certain degree, to a certain extent. Some of them are mutually exclusive. Some trees, I should say, are mutually exclusive. And if you max out 5 trees, you can build a building that will basically win the game. And I like that because A, it encourages you to work on to advance in a way that hasn't really been explored before, except in Civ 4. In Civ 4, the way it would work is you would expand your culture, and your territory would expand as your culture overwhelms theirs until finally their cities would basically defect to yours, and thus a cultural victory was with you conquering everyone culturally, if you understand what I mean. In this way, you are basically becoming such an advanced culture and actually going in the direction of what that word means that you develop to a point where no one else has any interest in fighting you. It is generally the implication you win by basically bowing out of the stage as a victor. You understand what I'm saying? And I like the way that's presented. I also enjoy the fact that a culture victory is actually quite expensive, all things to considered, in terms of manufacturing. It's actually very cheap financially in order to do a cultural victory. Indeed, you'll probably be making money hand over fist if you go for a cultural victory. There's, of course, the turn victory. That's kind of boring. The diplomatic victory is something I admittedly have a little bit of a problem with, but at the same time, I like it, as weird as that sounds. In Civ 5, they have these city-states, okay? Now, a city-state can never expand, can never make another city, and it has its own little territory, and it produces its tiny little units. They tend to be decently advanced as far as however advanced the overall world is at the time. And when you develop the UN later on in the game, you can vote for who the leader of the world is, basically, who wins diplomatically, who unites a significantly large alliance in order to win enough votes, and there you go, diplomatic victory. Again, makes a degree of sense, and it actually makes the city-states and having them care about you worth something. It is also worth noting, I must add, that the city-states do actually have several benefits, rather tangible benefits, not just, I'm being all diplomatic in my little story thing, but real beneficial things like increased research, depending on what you pick in your talent trees, increased gold from trade routes and stuff like that. Some of them will produce units for you. Some of them will gift you with, well, I guess there's two types of units: there's military units and naval units, that kind of thing. It does make them rather useful. The problem is if you're playing in a game with a relatively small number of city-states, diplomatic victory might as well be turned off, if you understand what I mean. And as an aside, I have never, ever seen an enemy actually try for diplomatic victory, not once. Which is funny because most of the enemies most of the enemy eyes try to do the whole "this is my city-state" and "this is my city-state," but they only ever get like one or two each, even if you have like 25 turned on. So I'm not sure if that's another AI problem, but yeah, it probably is. That's probably a more interesting aspect when you're playing against other people, which is something I don't do. I play with other people, not against them. Um, and then of course there's your classic military victory and your science victory, which basically are copy paste from any other Civ ever. Now, in Gods and Kings, they added a religious aspect, which it's funny that I was just talking not too long ago about how I don't like talking about religion with regards to a Voyager episode. But ultimately, all I'm going to say here is from terms of mechanics, okay? You can found a religion, and doing so basically gives you certain benefits based on what kind of religion you found. It is, for all intents and purposes, the same as if in Skyrim, for example, or any Elder Scrolls, when you select a race, you get some bonuses for picking that race. They're kind of small, they don't really do much, but it's just a little bit of a boost. That's basically where this is at. The only real difference to religion, there's actually two, is one, it enables you to purchase certain units with religious with faith, which is the religious currency. Most of those units are not overly useful, but you can use them for certain things. And the other is it changes the diplomatic side a little bit based on what cities have religions. For example, if you try to spread your religion into another nation that is trying to spread their own religion, you will lose points with them. Basically, they will start thinking ill of you. However, if your religion spreads naturally and you're not actually artificially trying to spread it, then other nations will think more fondly of you because they have adopted your religion. And that's basically it. It's such a minor feature that I'm not entirely sure why they added it at all. Now, oh God. One of the other things I really want to talk about with regards to Civ 5 is the graphics. They took a different turn in Civ 5. In Civ 4, one of the things that was really enjoyable about it was you could zoom all the way out, all the way to the point where you're seeing the clouds in the atmosphere, that kind of thing, right? Civ 5 doesn't let you do that. Civ 5 lets you pull out to a certain extent, and that's it. But it does let you zoom in quite a ways. I don't actually care for that much. I like getting the global view, especially every now and again. One thing I will give Civ 5 as a benefit, though, is they have this grid view, which is useful for certain circumstances, even if ultimately that's only to overcome its own detriments. Let me explain. Let's say you've built farmland, far as the eye can see, okay? Lots and lots of farms. And then you discover uranium. This is one that's happened to me more than often than not. Because the graphics in Civ 5 tend to be suboptimal in their execution, they look very nice. Don't mistake me; they actually look very nice. I rather enjoy the graphics of Civ 5, but they are not coded very efficiently, which shouldn't surprise anybody given the first thing I mentioned way back at the beginning here. So, rather than seeing the uranium peeking out through the farm as is what should happen, what you will see is a farm. So every now and again, when you discover a new resource, it's generally acceptable to go to the grid view and actually be like, aha, there's some uranium there, that kind of thing, because you kind of have to in order to be able to see where those resources are. That's not just true with uranium; that's true with oil. That's another very big one that has the same exact problem. Um, so again, this is kind of a benefit and a detriment. I would overall say the graphics of Civ 5 are an overall benefit because they do look very nice. It is also really something I personally enjoy to see the city grow. Like, okay, it is a grid, right? It's a hex grid, and you've got this one little spot here, which is where your city is. And at the beginning, within this spot, the actual part of the city is like this little thing here, and it grows and it grows and it grows until, graphically speaking, it actually goes past the confines of this thing. You actually see the outskirts of the city well out beyond where the actual grid is. And I actually rather enjoy that. It gets across the point that this is a city, something that is huge. I mean, to use an example, the greater Kansas City area is a fairly large space in terms of total real estate. And that's what I like seeing when I do that. That's what I like envisioning, is that this is I like that. I also like the fact that they're doing something that they've been doing for many years, which is, portraying several of the wonders nearby. For example, if you're on a coastal city and you build the Colossus, you'll actually see the Colossus out there on the shore, or the lighthouse, or the pyramids, things like that. Very nice touches. I also really enjoy the unit graphics and the animations they have. Sometimes they can be a little jarring. Usually that's just because the code is screwed up again. I know I keep mentioning that. But overall, from an aesthetic perspective, I do enjoy the way Civ 5 looks. Civ 5 also has a very nice UI. I don't have a better way to put that. Civ 4 and Civ 2 both had superior Civlopedias, or whatever you want to call them, because it wasn't called that back in Civ 2, and I actually don't remember what it was called. Uh, Civ 2 had the built-in editor, for example, which is a thing of beauty, and Civ 4 had that magnificent Civlopedia with all sorts of information about the history and the information behind there, and here's where it was, and here's it's in game, and here's some interesting quotes, and here's Leonard Nimoy reciting it. Beautiful stuff. Civ 5 doesn't really have that. Civ 5 has a kind of you search for a certain thing if there's something you're uncertain about, and then okay, there's that. Not so cool. But the ignoring that flaw, the overall UI is extremely user-friendly. You can play purely with the keyboard, you can play purely with the mouse, you can do the mouse drag thing, you can... there's a lot of, what's the term for that? Quality of life improvements that were made to the UI. I'm not going to go into a total list of them because there's quite a few. But overall, the game is much easier to play than previous Civs have been, if you follow where I'm going with that. And a lot a lot easier to pick up, a lot easier to learn, a lot easier to play even for someone who's been playing it for many, many, many hours, such as myself. Speaking of which, I need to pull that up in a minute. But anyways, on top of that, it is worth noting that most of the things in Civ 5 came about as a direct result of things that people wanted to see from Civ 3 and from Civ 4. It is widely recognized and widely known that several fans of the original Civs are people who were working on Civ 5. And it is probably why so much of the core gameplay, ignoring the coding problems, the bug problems, and the poor patching cycle, but nevertheless the core gameplay is still good, and still there's a reason I still play the game so often. It is also worth noting that Civ 5 is a beautiful game to play while you're doing something else, because it only requires a certain amount of your attention if you don't feel like putting too much into it, if you follow me. That being said, if you're playing on some of the harder difficulties, that game can be downright brutal, to the point of actually unfair. It goes a little too far, in my opinion. It artificially makes you lesser while making the enemy greater, while not really doing much to the AI, really. And well, that is actually the definition of artificial difficulty, which is something I don't enjoy. I prefer actual difficulty, which is admittedly much harder to do, especially with a turn-based game such as this one. But it is something that is possible. It's something that's been done before, and I just kind of wish they had gone that route. But if you're looking for a challenge, it certainly has that. Now I'm going to get brighter here for a second because I got to look something up, because I meant to have this up for this. Oh my! Bright. Okay. Where is the thing that I'm looking for? Here we go. Now, I was talking about add-ons. As I mentioned, Civ 5 has beautiful add-on support, the best I've seen since Civ 2, in my honest opinion. It has not been... the Steam Workshop works beautifully, and there's so much awesome stuff on here. But what I wanted to share was several add-ons I personally use, because that has been asked more than once. Alright, where is my list here? I actually put it on this thing just so I can share it with you. You'll have to give me just a moment, please. There's going to be a lot of maps. There's not that many scenarios, which is the only thing I would lament. One of the things Civ 2 was so beautiful about was because you basically had the whole engine available right there, and so you could do basically anything with the scenarios. And no other game ever really has had that level of beautiful, incredible customization. But you can do quite a bit with Civ 5. Okay, what do we got here? Hang on just a second. All right. What is this one? Here we go. I had a mod called... all of these are available on Steam Workshop, by the way. Am I visible? Hang on, let me pull up the thing here. There we go. City-State Diplomacy mod, or CSD. What this mod does is it makes more a more greater variety of missions, what will happen is these little pop-ups will show up every turn or every other turn, or basically whenever it happens. It's a random chance. This particular city-state wants you to do blah. What blah is can vary wildly, and this mod adds several options to what blah can be. And in so doing, it lowers the importance of just flinging money at city-states to win. Instead you actually can do missions for them instead of, I'm the richest and therefore win. So I rather like that. I use the Legendary Earth mod, which makes a massive, very realistic Earth thing. I have two Azeroth map mods because I rather enjoy playing in terrain that I know without having to think about it. What do we got here? I have one that I use only occasionally. It's called Terrain Rebalance Changes. What it does is it gives deserts and snow some use rather than being completely useless, which enables you to do more if you feel like being weird and not having everything be tropical, if you understand my meaning. Unlimited Barbarian Exp, which is self-explanatory. For those of you who don't know, Barbarians only give experience to a certain point in the game. Now, if you have Barbarians on at all, you know that Barbarians will keep coming back for quite a while, and you will keep fighting them for forever. And at a certain point, you're just not getting X from it. You're literally just wasting your time beating these guys. I like the fact that I can continue to effectively train my military on Barbarians, and in fact intentionally leave Barbarian camps alive so I can train my military on them, which makes sense not only from a gameplay perspective, but from a lore perspective, if you follow me. Cultural diffusion. This is an add-on that allows certain tiles to have the culture influence from multiple civilizations, depending on who has the most, that kind of thing. It's basically a rehash of the Civ 4 idea there. City limits, very simple mod. If you don't know I think it's 3 by 3 by 3 by 3 grid, then it's a good way to see exactly how far your city is going to be able to extend, that kind of thing. Scroll up. I have Play the World and Play Europe, both the Gods and Kings editions, because I have Gods and Kings. Those are exactly what they sound like. Very nice world maps, one for the whole planet, one for just Europe. The Europe one and the World one both have the option to have, if you play, for example, the French, you will start in Paris, where Paris actually is on the map. If you choose to play as the Balkan states, you can stand out there, that kind of thing. A couple of custom civilizations. I have Arcadia and the USSR, both of which I rather enjoy. I have something called Promotions Expansion Pack. What this does is makes a huge tree for promotions. As you promote units in this game, they get certain bonuses. Now, in the default game, these are rather vanilla. I get an increased bonus on this kind of terrain. I get more attacks per round, that kind of thing. This makes that from like a little tree like this into more like this. And you have to actually make choices because it's basically impossible to reach level 87 or whatever it is in order to get all of these. So you have to choose as you go up, which I like. And I like having specialized units that are better at, aquatic warfare, for example, than everyone else's. Let's see, a couple other map packs here. I have the Final Fantasy VII world map. I have... I guess that's it for maps, actually. But I also... Oh, no. I also have Tyria, which is the Guild Wars world, for anybody who's curious. And then there's a couple other add-ons that are kind of fun ones, like this one called Throne Room. For those of you who remember, there was this Throne Room feature back in Civ 2, which I really liked. And it's basically that. It makes that work in Civ 5. Based on a certain score, which the game itself keeps track of, you are granted another addition to your throne room, and you can improve it over time, which I thought was really cool. It's the exact same one as Civ 2, though, so if you're looking for anything new or exciting, it's not there. Finally, there are two big mods. These are what we in the business would call TCs, total conversions. If you know what that term is, then awesome. If you don't, I'm going to go ahead and try and explain it anyways. A total conversion is an attempt to either rebalance or completely change a game through modding and through add-oning into a completely different format, basically. For example, one of them I use Civilization Knights. Now, I actually don't use this anymore because Civilization Knights is brutally difficult, and while I leave it on, I still have it subscribed, obviously. I don't like to use that all the time. I'm not always in the mood for the most psychotically difficult challenge I could always have, you know what I mean? But it is extremely in-depth, extremely in detail. I couldn't possibly summarize all the things. I just recommend you look it up. Civilization Knights. And the other one is called Community Call to Power, which takes a lot of the features that were in Civilization 4's Call to Power and adds them into Civ 5. In fact, I actually want to look at this because there was one feature in specific I wanted to share with you. What was it? Ah, yes, the whole concept. There's a lot of more additional resources, and the idea of a trade monopoly. For example, you can have if you have so many buildings that are harvesting this type of resource. For example, let's use squid as an example. You can build a conglomerate based on that, which can build a corporation based on that, which can build a monopoly based on that, depending on how much squid you actually have across your whole empire, which basically means that nobody else can ever buy that. You see where I'm going with that? And the tech tree is expanded by like quadruple and goes well into the future. Uh, there's a new there's a new social system because instead of just having the eight, I think it is, social policies I mentioned earlier with the cultural thing, instead it's more like five categories of eight. So 40, a lot more stuff. It basically adds all sorts of stuff to the game. It is a beautiful mod, and I definitely very much recommend that one. Now, unfortunately, I found myself in a circumstance where I'm not actually sure what else to say. Civ 5 is an amazing game. I love it. The number of hours I've put into it is over 400 at this point. I can tell because it says that over on Steam. And yes, Civ 5 is a long turn-based game where each game lasts forever, but I still think that's rather indicative. The only other game on my Steam list, at least, that is any close to Civ 5 is Spore, which, which is also basically the same type of thing. So you get my point here. I feel like I don't have anything else to share. It's such a wonderful game if you're into 4X games. I suppose the best thing I could talk about here is how does it measure up? I actually got a copy of Civ 2 and Master of Orion 2 working recently. For those of you who don't know, a lot of older PC games you have to basically jury rig in order to work on a modern system, especially with Windows 7. And so I recently got Civ 2 working, and I got Master of Orion 2 working, especially in preparation for this review, because I really wanted to go back and look at them and say, okay, how does it stack up now? Civ 2 is still enjoyable to play. I admit there's certain parts about it that actually irritate me. Let me give you two examples right off the top of my head. I already mentioned one. When two units attack, they keep attacking until one of them dies. Second problem. If I have units could stack, okay, back in Civ 2, so I could have 20 tanks on one tile. You could have one bomber. That bomber attacks my tanks, and it will destroy all 20 tanks if it kills the one who happens to be on the top of the stack, right? Now you could say that makes sense, but because the way the combat system is back in Civ 2, it could also be you could attack me with an archer who happens to have several bonuses, and he will destroy my 20 tanks just as easily. So that does admittedly bother me, and if I were to try and it's difficult to actually pursue city siege tactics with the stacking problem because you're always at risk the more you stack, and yet you need so many units in order to capture cities in that game. All that being said, Civ 2 still is an absolutely wonderful and amazing game. I enjoy the scenarios just as much as I did, and I enjoy going through the mods just as much as I did. I don't enjoy just playing Civ 2 as a Civ game, though, not like I used to. It is, in my honest opinion, that if you're looking for a Civ, if you're not doing a world war scenario, if you're starting with your one settler who makes your one city and you build up from there, that Civ 5 is a superior game to Civ 2. And I can't believe I'm saying that, but it's true. The only reason Civ 2 is still a superior game overall, in my opinion, is because of the scenario support. Civ 5, I've only seen one scenario so far. It's called World War II Red Edition. By the way, I recommend you look up that one too. I meant to mention that, but I wanted to get to it here. Was because it's the only one I've seen that's any good. It is very good. It's actually very well done. And I highly recommend it if you're into World War II scenarios. But that's it. In Civ 2, even with the basic vanilla game, you had the XCOM thing, and the Master of Orion thing, and the end of the world apocalypse thing, and the fantasy setting thing, and the World War One thing, and the World War Two thing. There were so many scenarios just packaged with the game, and every one of them was freaking amazing. And on top of that, the modding community that made additional scenarios for Civ 2 was extremely prolific. There were so many. Oh my God! The Red Front is probably the one I still remember to this day. It was a beautiful one, and it was all about the Russian front, and during World War II, and it was absolutely freaking amazing. And there was another one with regards to World War I, which was the whole planet. the whole Earth as opposed to just Europe, and being played in a world one scenario, which was amazing, beautifully done. You don't get that in Civ 5, and I admittedly missed that quite a bit. The other thing I wanted to compare this to was Master of Orion 2. Master of Orion 2 is still probably one of my favorite 4X games of all time. The only games that really contest it are games like Alpha Centauri and Civ 2, and admittedly Civ 5, despite all its problems. But if you asked me which game do I prefer to sit down and build a new empire out of nothing in, I would probably say Master of Orion 2. It is still immensely enjoyable to me to make a new race. I almost always do a custom race these days, and slowly stretch my way out through the galaxy and do the research and build up my fleets and design my ships and all that fun stuff. That is still enjoyable to me. I admit I don't actually do the combat anymore. I just don't see the point. I auto-resolve every time. But the overall gameplay is still just as fun to me as it was back then, if not more so, because I can appreciate it now, because there haven't been a lot of really good Space 4X games. Yes, there have been some. Endless Space comes to mind, which, by the way, yes, I did buy, and I have played, but moving on. But I guess the reason I bring up these games is I didn't do Alpha Centauri because I didn't have time. Actually, I couldn't find the CD either. But comparing Civ 5, a game that I played hours upon hours upon hours on, versus Civ 2 and Master of Orion 2, games I have played months and months and months upon, Civ 5 is probably third in that list, but the fact that it is not completely destroyed by the other two speaks very highly of it, in my opinion. The fact that I still enjoy playing Civ 5 speaks very highly of it. The fact that if I want to play a build up my empire game, I will either reach for Master of Orion or Civ 5 really says something about it. I I've tried to quantify that as I've been going through this thought process, this review, this rumination, whatever you want to call it. But ultimately, I'm not even sure I'm really getting the whole point across, because part of the enjoyment of Civ 5 is that it has been, I hate myself for saying this, it has been dumbed down a bit. Now, I say that speaking as someone who genuinely enjoys psychotically complicated games. I am someone who did love Rebellion, or Supremacy if you prefer, after all. And another game that I'll be getting to as we go through these videos soon. But uh, ultimately, there is something rather enjoyable about being able to casually play something like that. Not to sound unkind, but for example, when I'm playing Tor, or I should say when I was playing Tor with Charlie, it was something to... I liked playing Civ 5 while I was doing it because I hated playing Tor. I've mentioned this before. The gameplay bothered me so much, still did, even when I went back to it after it went free very briefly. And I just couldn't stand it. So I would have Civ 5 going at the same time because it wasn't ultra complicated and I could play both games basically at the same time and therefore actually enjoy myself. And thus, I'd be playing Civ 5 while we're kind of combating over here, and then I'd kind of focus on this when the cutscenes happen. Then I'd go back to... You get where I'm going with this. On top of that, Civ 5 is also a really nice thing to do when I just feel like building an empire. You know what I mean? You probably don't. I tend to go through moods. I'm sure most gamers do. Sometimes I'm just really in the mood for Pokemon. You can laugh if you want, but I mean it. Every now and again, it's just, I really want that lighthearted, strategic sort of, I'm going to go out and explore the world on my own kind of thing. Every now and again, I'm in the mood. Every now and again, I'm in the mood to build an empire. I want to go out and I want to make it an empire that will last up until the heavens, that we will surmise and surpass all of the others. Filth within this world. No, I'm kidding. But in all seriousness, every now and again, I just feel like building a nation. And Civ 5 is beautiful for that. There's a reason I have so many hundreds of hours listed on it. And ultimately, do I recommend Civ 5 to anybody who is a fan of 4X? Yes, I do, especially now, because a lot of the problems with it have been fixed. There are still some graphical glitches, but that's basically it at this point. Let me give you a good example of what I'm talking about. I know I've already given you one, but sometimes, let's say there's a guy in this tile here, and he's just finished building a road, and so you move him here and you have him build a road, and then he builds a road here, so what you should see is this, right? This is across like 3 turns. But unless you either force the camera to move in and out or something else resets it, it won't actually render because it's poorly coded. But if you do that and you force the camera out, then it'll be, oh, right, here it is. Here's the road. Little problems like that, you do kind of have to get used to, but overall the game is very enjoyable to play. And I guess I'm kind of out of things to say. If you're not a 4X fan, actually, I'm sorry, there's one last thing. If you are not a 4X fan and you want to get into it, as much as I hate myself for saying it, this is probably the way to do it with Civ 5, because the games that I personally consider to be superior are harder to get into and have more difficult UEs and are much harder to get running at all, let alone get a hold of. You know, buying a copy of Master of Orion is not the easiest thing in the world anymore. Same with Civ 2, same with Alpha Centauri. But that being said, Civ 5 is a game that you can go buy on Steam, especially on Steam sale. It gets down to like the $5 range, and just start it and go. And if you feel like modding, you can hit the Steam Workshop and just start browsing. It is incredibly user friendly, is what I'm trying to get across here, and it is probably an excellent starting point for people getting into 4X. I know that especially because I know someone who has never played 4X games in his life, and he and I played Civ 5 a lot. So overall, definitely a great game, definitely a recommendation. And this is going to be like one of my shortest reviews ever because I don't have anything else to say. So I'm going to go back to playing Half-Life. I'll talk to you guys later.